"Son, please let me out. I'm thirsty," I yelled, banging on the basement door for the third time that day. Silence was his only answer. 4 days locked in the dark, no water, no food, while my own son waited for me to sign over $6 million. What he didn't know is that every second of that hell was already calculated in my plan. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the bell, because we post new stories every day on William's Revenge Stories. Leave a like and tell us in the comments what city and country you're watching from. My name is Andrew Vidal. I'm 68 years old, and for 40 of those years I built my life brick by brick in Chicago. I worked as a mason since I was 15, then started my own construction company, put up buildings, built families with good jobs, and built a fortune of $6 million, which I plan to split between my son Mark and my only granddaughter, Sarah. I never imagined that money would become my prison. It all started on August 16th, 2023. It was a Wednesday. I remember because on Wednesdays I always water the garden plants after lunch. I was watering the hydrangeas that my late wife Mary planted 10 years ago when I heard Mark's car screech to a stop in front of my house. The engine stayed on. That detail should have warned me, but you always want to believe your children come to visit out of love, not necessity. Mark got out of the car looking agitated, his face red and his shirt wrinkled. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. Behind him, Brenda Peterson, my daughter-in-law, walked with purpose, holding a black leather folder under her arm. Her heels clicked on the pavement with a rhythm that chilled my blood. "Dad, we need to talk." "Urgently," Mark said, without even a hello. His voice was trembling slightly, but there was something beyond nervousness. There was desperation. I put down the hose and invited them in. In the living room, Mark sat on the edge of the sofa, unable to stay still. Brenda stood by the window watching me with those calculating eyes that always made me distrust her, ever since she married my son 11 years ago. "Dad, my business is in crisis. I need $2 million, immediately, or I'll lose everything," Mark blurted out. His hands were twisting nervously. I sat down in my favorite armchair, the same one where my wife Mary used to knit while we watched the news. I crossed my legs and studied my son in silence for several seconds that felt like an eternity. "Mark, your import company has been in trouble for 3 years. I've loaned you money 4 times in the last 2 years. $150,000 that you never paid back. What really happened to that money?" Mark's face turned pale. Brenda cut in before he could answer. "Andrew, this isn't about old loans. This is about saving your son's future, your granddaughter Sarah's future. If Mark loses the company, what will your granddaughter eat? Where will she live?" Something in her tone bothered me deeply. It wasn't a plea. It was a demand disguised as family concern. "Sarah is 16, and she's at an excellent public high school. You two live in a house that I helped you buy. Mark, look me in the eye and tell me the truth. What did you spend the money I loaned you on?" My son looked down. That gesture told me everything. In 42 years of being a father, I learned to read Mark's every expression. The shame in his eyes wasn't from a failed business. It was from something much worse. Brenda opened the black folder and took out several documents. She placed them on the coffee table with precise, almost rehearsed movements. "Here are the transfer papers. We just need your signature and your bank account details. It's $2 million now, and if everything goes well, we'll pay you back in 6 months." She said this with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I took the documents and reviewed them slowly. It wasn't a loan request. It was a direct transfer with no collateral, no defined terms, no conditions. Basically, they wanted me to gift them $2 million, trusting their word. "This isn't a loan, Brenda. This is a donation," I said, putting the papers back on the table. "For God's sake, Dad. Now you're worried about legal technicalities? I'm your son." "Don't you trust me?" Mark shouted, jumping to his feet. "I trust you, son, but I don't trust the decisions you've been making lately. Tell me exactly what you need the money for. Give me details about the business. Show me the accounting books. Explain what went wrong." I answered, staying calm. Mark looked at Brenda, searching for support. She gave him an almost invisible nod. "It's a debt to Chinese suppliers. If I don't pay by Friday, they'll seize everything," Mark lied. I knew because when he lies, his left eye twitches slightly, just like when he was a kid and denied breaking a vase. "Names of these suppliers?" I asked. "What does that matter now?" Brenda interrupted, raising her voice. "Are you going to let your son lose everything over pride? What would Mary say if she were alive?" Mentioning my late wife was her mistake. I stood up slowly, feeling disappointment mixed with something I didn't want to name yet. Mary would say a father's job is to teach, not to endlessly bail someone out. She would say that giving money without limits creates dependent children, not responsible ones, I replied in a firm voice. Mark's face transformed. The desperation gave way to something darker. Rage. You were always the same, always with your lessons and your morality. You have $6 million saved up and you can't share too. You're selfish. His words echoed on the walls of the house I built with my own hands. Brenda moved closer to Mark and whispered something in his ear. I watched my son's eyes harden as he listened. In that moment, I understood. The moment I had been dreading for months, and paradoxically preparing for, had arrived. There was something in the way Brenda whispered in Mark's ear that felt rehearsed, as if they had practiced this scene before they even got here. I stood there, watching every micro-expression on my son's face, as his wife spoke quietly to him. His pupils dilated slightly, his jaw tensed. The hands that were trembling seconds before were now balled into tight fists. I had been observing these changes in Mark for 6 months. Ever since February 2023, when he came to ask me for $50,000 for an urgent investment, something in him had mutated. He was no longer the man who had built his import company with 15 years of hard work. This Mark had permanent dark circles under his eyes, answered hushed calls at midnight, and every time he visited my house, his eyes scanned the walls as if calculating the value of every object. I am not a naive man. 40 years running a construction company taught me to read people better than any book. I recognized the signs because I had seen them before in employees who developed addictions. The constant agitation, the needless lies, the progressive emotional distance. That's why, in March of that same year, I had quietly hired David Miller, my trusted lawyer for 25 years. Not to spy on my son, but to protect the inheritance that my granddaughter Sarah was supposed to receive one day. David investigated for 5 months, and uncovered a truth I preferred not to face until this very moment. Mark had developed a severe online gambling addiction. The bank statements David showed me in July revealed weekly transfers to digital casinos, $120,000 in 6 months. The money supposedly invested in Chinese merchandise never existed. The loans I gave him ended up on virtual poker tables and sports bets. But there was more. The photographs David took showed Mark entering loan shark offices in dangerous parts of Chicago. One of them, according to the investigation, was known for his violent collection methods. My son owed $300,000 to men who didn't accept excuses. I knew all of this as Brenda finished whispering instructions in his ear. I had kept quiet about all of this for months, hoping Mark would come to me with the truth, that he would ask for real help instead of more money to feed his destruction. "Dad, listen to me," Mark said with a voice I no longer recognized. It was cold, devoid of the warmth that always characterized my son. "I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you I need that money, and I need it now. It's my inheritance, just early. Technically, that money is also mine. Your inheritance exists when I die, Mark. As long as I'm alive, this fortune is mine, and I decide what to do with it," I replied, feeling my heart accelerate, but maintaining the calm tone I learned in years of difficult negotiations. Brenda stepped toward me with calculated steps. She was wearing a navy blue dress that probably cost over $1,000, Italian shoes, a designer handbag, all paid for with the money I loaned them, and they never returned. "Andrew, let's be realistic. You're 68 years old. You live alone in this huge house ever since Mary died. What do you need $6 million for? Are you going to take it to the grave? Mark is your only son. Sarah is your only granddaughter. We are your family." Her words sounded logical on the surface, but there was poison in every syllable. She spoke to me as if my age made me an obstacle, as if my very existence was an inconvenience standing between them and the money. "I need that money to live with dignity for the rest of my years, for medical care, to make sure Sarah gets a college education no matter what. And yes, also to enjoy the fruits of 40 years of work," I said, walking toward the window. Outside, the August sun was setting on the garden that Mary and I cultivated for decades. The red roses she loved were blooming next to the cherry tree we planted when Mark was born. Every corner of this property held memories of a life built with love and sacrifice. Work, always talking about your damn work. Mark exploded, slamming his fist on the table. The transfer documents jumped from the impact. Do you know how many times I waited up for you as a kid and you never came home? How many family dinners you missed for your construction sites? How many of my birthdays you forgot because you were closing contracts? His accusations hurt because they contained truth. I worked tirelessly, sometimes sacrificing family moments, to build the financial future he was now claiming from me as if it were an outstanding debt. You're right, son. I wasn't perfect. But every extra hour I worked was so you would never lack anything, so you could study in good schools, so you could have the company you now run, so Sarah could grow up with opportunities I never had. I replied, feeling emotion threatened to break my voice. Then pay me for those lost years. Give me what's fair, Mark shouted, his eyes bloodshot. I looked at him steadily and saw something that froze my soul. There was no sadness or frustration in his gaze anymore. There was something more primitive, more desperate. I saw a man on the edge of an abyss, willing to drag anyone down with him to save himself. Brenda picked up the documents from the table and held them out to me again. Sign it, Andrew. Sign it, and we can end this ugly argument. 2 million now, and we all continue being a happy family, she said with a smile that didn't reach her gray eyes. I looked at the papers. I looked at my daughter-in-law. I looked at my son. In that instant, I understood it was time to execute the plan that David and I had designed for months. A painful but necessary plan. A plan that required me to endure temporary humiliation and suffering to save my son from himself. I'm not signing, I said in a quiet but firm voice. The silence that followed was thick, electric. Mark and Brenda exchanged a look that contained a nonverbal agreement. Then my son walked toward me with slow, deliberate steps. Dad, I'm giving you one last chance. Sign those papers, or you will regret it. Are you threatening me, Mark? I asked, not backing down an inch. I'm warning you, he replied, placing his hand on my shoulder with a pressure that bordered on aggression. I looked at that hand, the same one I held when he took his first steps, the same one I helped bandage when he fell off his bike at age 7, the same one I shook with pride the day he opened his company. Now that hand was gripping me as if I were an enemy. Let go of me, son, I said softly. Instead of obeying, Mark squeezed harder. His fingers dug into my shoulder while Brenda positioned herself on my other side, blocking my exit to the front door. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes for a second. Everything was happening exactly as David had predicted. The plan was entering its most painful but also most crucial phase. I needed my son to reach the point of no return so the legal consequences would be irrefutable. All right, I said finally. I'll get the bank details. They're in my study in the basement. Mark loosened his grip and smiled. Brenda exhaled, relieved. They both thought they had won. What neither of them knew is that my house's basement would be the stage where their real lesson would begin. I went down the basement stairs with Mark, following so close I could feel his breath on my neck. Brenda stayed upstairs, watching the front door as if she feared I might escape. Each wooden step creaked under our feet, a familiar sound I had heard thousands of times over the 30 years I'd lived in this house. The basement was always my personal refuge. It's where I kept important documents, old photographs, tools from my days as a mason, and a small safe built into the wall where Mary and I used to keep emergency cash. Mark knew this space since he was a child, when he'd come down to find old toys or help me with small repairs. Hurry up, Dad. I don't have all day, Mark said, turning on the light. The single yellow bulb lit up the rectangular space, about 400 square feet. I walked over to the old oak desk I inherited from my own father. I opened the first drawer slowly, searching through folders. My movements were deliberately slow. I needed Mark to let his guard down completely, to believe he was in total control. The bank codes are in a red folder. Let me find it, I lied, rustling through papers unnecessarily. Mark moved closer, impatient. I could sense his growing anxiety. His fingers drummed against his right leg, a nervous tic he'd developed in recent months. He probably needed the money not just for the loan sharks, but also to keep gambling. That's how addiction works. It's never enough. There's always a next bet that promises to win it all back. Suddenly I heard fast footsteps coming down the stairs. Brenda appeared, her face tense. Mark, enough games. Take the papers and force him to sign right here, she ordered, pulling the transfer documents from her purse again. My son hesitated for a second. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps the last trace of the decent man he used to be. But Brenda stared him down with such intensity that the moment of humanity vanished. "Dad, sign." "Now," Mark demanded, placing the papers on the desk and pulling a pen from his pocket. "Son, think about what you're doing. We can still talk. Get professional help. Face your problems the right way," I said, looking him directly in the eyes. "The only help I need is those $2 million, he shouted, completely losing his composure. He pushed me hard against the wall. My back hit the cold concrete, and I felt a sharp pain shoot up my spine. Brenda stepped between us. "Andrew, this can be easy, or it can be hard. You decide. Sign now, and we all walk out that door as a family. Or you stay down here until you come to your senses," she said with terrifying calm. Then I understood. They had planned this. This wasn't an impulsive visit born from desperation. They had discussed it, coordinated, decided exactly what to do if I refused. The car engine left running, the documents already prepared, Brenda's strategic position blocking the exits. It was all premeditated. "You're going to lock me in here?" I asked, showing no fear, although my heart was pounding. "Until you sign, yes," Mark answered, avoiding my gaze. The shame still existed, somewhere deep in his conscience. "Mark, I'm your father. I'm 68 years old. Are you really going to do this to me?" I tried to appeal to his humanity one last time. Brenda answered for him. "Your age is precisely why you should be reasonable. How many years do you have left? 10, 15, if you're lucky? Mark has his whole life ahead of him. Sarah needs a successful father, not a failure being chased by debts." Her words revealed the true nature of this woman. To her, I was just a temporary obstacle between her family and the money. My life, my well-being, my rights, none of it mattered compared to her immediate needs. Mark walked toward the stairs. For a moment, I thought he had reconsidered, that he would go up and we would end this madness. But instead of going up, he pulled shut the heavy wooden door that separated the basement from the rest of the house. I heard him slide the metal deadbolt from the outside. "What are you doing?" I shouted, running up the stairs. Mark's voice came, muffled, from the other side. "You're staying here until you sign everything, Dad. When you're ready to be reasonable, knock on the door, and we'll come down with the documents." I pounded the wood with both fists. "Mark, open this door now! This is kidnapping! It's a serious crime!" I yelled with all the strength in my lungs. Only silence answered. Then I heard their footsteps moving away, going upstairs. I heard muffled voices, arguing about something I couldn't make out. Finally, I heard the front door close with a solid thud. I stood in front of the locked door, breathing heavily. The initial panic threatened to take over, but I fought it back. This was exactly what David and I had anticipated. Well, not exactly this. We had foreseen pressure, threats, maybe some psychological manipulation. But actual kidnapping went beyond our most pessimistic projections. I walked slowly down the stairs and sat in the old office chair by the desk. The basement had one small rectangular window near the ceiling, at ground level outside. It let in natural light during the day, but it was too high and too small to be an escape. I scanned my surroundings with a clinical eye. There was no food down here, no clean drinking water either, although I remembered an old pipe that dripped slightly in the northeast corner, a residue from a bad repair years ago. That water wasn't safe to drink, but in an extreme case it could keep me hydrated temporarily. The temperature was cool, around 65 degrees. Uncomfortable, but not dangerous. There were some old blankets and a cardboard box I could use to stay warm at night. I took off my watch and placed it on the desk. It was 3:40 p.m. on August 16th. I started calculating. David had instructions to call me every day at 9 a.m. If I didn't answer for 2 consecutive days, he was to activate the emergency protocol we had established, contact the authorities, and present all the documentation we had gathered on Mark's activities. That meant I had to hold out until August 18th, minimum, 48 hours, possibly more if David needed time to act. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. The initial pain of paternal rejection was beginning to transform into something else. Determination. Mark had crossed an invisible line that couldn't be uncrossed. The consequences of his actions would be permanent and unavoidable. But beyond the legal aspect, This experience would serve as the ultimate lesson. My son needed to hit absolute rock bottom to have any chance of recovery. Addicts don't change as long as they have safety nets. They need to face the real consequences of their decisions. I opened the second desk drawer and pulled out an old notebook with yellowed pages. I found a pen that still worked and began to write. First day, August 16th, 3:40 p.m. Mark has locked me in the basement, demanding $2 million. I decided to document every hour, every thought, every detail of this experience. If I was going to suffer this humiliation, at least I would turn it into a testament that one day my son would read and understand the price of his actions. The first night was the longest of my life. The darkness in the basement wasn't complete, thanks to a faint glow from the streetlights coming through the small window, but that weak light only made the shadows more unsettling. I wrapped myself in 2 dusty blankets I found and lay on the concrete floor, using a cardboard box as a makeshift pillow. The hunger wasn't bothering me yet, but thirst was starting to manifest as a persistent dryness in my throat. Around 11 p.m., I heard footsteps upstairs. Mark and Brenda had returned. Their voices were muffled but distinguishable through the wooden ceiling. "How long do you think he'll last?" Brenda asked. "I don't know. He's stubborn." "Always has been," Mark replied, his voice tired. "Well, it better be soon. I have to pay Rodriguez by Friday, or he'll break our legs," she said with chilling coldness. Then the pieces clicked into place. Rodriguez was one of the most dangerous loan sharks in Chicago, according to David's report. Brenda was in debt too, not just Mark. She had probably introduced my son to the world of gambling, feeding his addiction while hiding her own. The footsteps moved away, toward the bedroom. The house fell silent. I tried to sleep, but the cold from the floor seeped through the blankets. Every half hour I woke up with cramps in my legs, or pain in my back. At 68, the body doesn't tolerate abuse like it did in my youth as a mason. Dawn broke on August 17th around 7 a.m. The daylight coming through the window let me see my prison better. I explored every corner systematically. On a high shelf I found 3 empty turpentine bottles, rusty tools, boxes of old company documents. Nothing useful for escape or survival. The dripping pipe was in the corner where Mary used to store Christmas decorations. The water dripped slowly, forming a small puddle on the concrete. I knelt and tasted a drop with my finger. It tasted like metal and dirt, but it was water. I placed an old bucket underneath and waited for it to fill, drop by drop. Around 9 a.m. I heard my cell phone ringing somewhere upstairs. It was David, making his scheduled daily call. The ringing went on 15 times before it stopped. I imagined my lawyer frowning at the lack of an answer, but it was still only the first day. He needed another failed attempt tomorrow to activate the protocol. At 10 a.m. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. The bolt slid back, but the door only opened a crack. A hand appeared, pushing a piece of paper through the opening. "Good morning, Dad. Here are the documents again." "Sign, and we'll let you out," Mark said, without opening the door fully. I approached the stairs slowly, letting my knees creak audibly. I wanted him to hear my physical discomfort, to feel the weight of what he was doing. "Son, I'm thirsty." "At least give me a glass of water," I begged in a cracking voice, exaggerating my weakness. "Sign first," he replied curtly. "Mark, please, I'm your father. Are you going to let me die of thirst?" I insisted, knocking softly on the door. Silence. Then I heard Brenda from upstairs. "Don't give him anything. Let him suffer a little more until he understands we're serious." The door slammed shut. The bolt slid back into place. I sat on the top step for several minutes, not out of real despair, but because I needed time to observe something crucial. Through the crack at the bottom of the door, I could see the hallway upstairs. And more importantly, I saw Mark's shoes as he walked away. They were the same black Nikes I bought him for his birthday 5 years ago. The soles were so worn down that the original tread was almost gone. The laces were broken and tied back together clumsily. A man who supposedly runs a successful import business doesn't wear shattered shoes for 5 years. This detail confirmed what I already knew. Mark had lost everything a long time ago. The company probably only existed on paper. The money he was asking for wasn't to save a business. It was to survive one more day in the endless cycle of debt and gambling. I went back to the desk and continued writing in my notebook. I documented everything: times, conversations, physical sensations. These pages would be legal evidence, but also a mirror for Mark to see his reflection in one day. The stomach pain started around noon. It wasn't intense hunger yet, just a nagging emptiness. I drank a little of the water collected in the bucket. It tasted terrible, but it temporarily eased the thirst. I worried about getting sick, but I needed to stay conscious and functional. I spent the afternoon mentally organizing every step of the plan. David would call tomorrow at 9. If I didn't answer, he would wait until the 19th in the morning before acting. That meant holding out until then. 2 full days locked up. Painful but bearable. The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the thirst. It was the absolute loneliness. 50 hours without talking to anyone, without human contact, without seeing anything but these 4 concrete walls. I understood why isolation is considered psychological torture. To keep my sanity, I started talking to Mary. Yes, my wife, dead for 3 years. I sat in the chair and talked to her as if she were there. Mary, your son has locked us in here. Can you believe it? The boy we raised with so much love has betrayed us for money, I said out loud. Hearing my own voice broke the oppressive silence. I imagined her response. Mary was always tougher than me on Mark when he misbehaved. You saw this coming, Andrew. You always protected him too much. I warned you that you were raising a dependent boy, she would say, in that direct tone I missed so much. You're right, my love, but I can still teach him. This will be his last lesson. The hardest, but the most necessary, I answered into the void. The afternoon of the second day passed with agonizing slowness. I did light exercises to keep my circulation going, short walks around the basement, stretches, push-ups against the wall. My body protested, but it obeyed. Around 6 p.m. I heard a car engine. New voices upstairs. Mark had brought visitors. I moved to the stairs to listen better. The old man still won't sign, Mark said. And what do you expect? That he'll gift it to you out of fatherly love? Replied a rough male voice I didn't recognize. Give him another night without water. Tomorrow he'll be begging. Brenda laughed. He's been in there almost 2 days. I don't think he'll last much longer. Well, he better. Rodriguez isn't patient, and neither am I. If you two don't have my money by Friday, you're going to find out what suffering really means, the unknown voice threatened. The footsteps moved away. I understood that Mark didn't just owe Rodriguez. He owed this other creditor too. The web of debt was even more extensive than David had discovered. My son was trapped in a destructive spiral that would only end in tragedy if someone didn't intervene drastically. That night, I pounded on the door harder, letting my desperation sound convincing. Mark, please, I'm thirsty. My whole body hurts. I yelled until I was hoarse. No one answered. The house remained in absolute silence. Maybe they had left, or maybe they had just decided to ignore my pleas completely. I collapsed on the top step, genuinely exhausted. The acting was mixing with reality. I really was thirsty. My body really did hurt. The difference was that I knew this would end soon, while they believed they were in total control. Tomorrow would be the decisive day. The third dawn arrived with brutal clarity. The sunlight streamed through the rectangular window, illuminating dust particles suspended in the stale basement air. My throat burned as if I had swallowed ground glass. My cracked lips were bleeding slightly. The dirty water from the pipe was no longer enough to quench the progressive dehydration. I stood up with difficulty. My knees barely responded after sleeping on the cold floor for 3 straight nights. I calculated it was about 7 a.m. on August 18th. David would try to call at 9 a.m. When he got no answer for the second day in a row, he would activate the protocol. Police, documentation, rescue. I just needed to hold on for a few more hours. I drank the last sip of water from the bucket. It tasted like rust and dirt, but my body absorbed it desperately. Then I sat on the stairs and waited. I didn't have the energy to walk or exercise. Every movement required conscious effort. Around 7:15 a.m., I heard something unexpected. A door closing outside the house. Not the front door, but the side door, the one leading to the backyard. Then absolute silence for several minutes. Suddenly a soft tapping on the basement window startled me. I looked up and saw a shadow moving on the other side of the dirty glass. Someone was out there crouching at ground level. "Andrew, are you down there?" whispered a male voice I recognized immediately. Thomas Moore, my 7 one-year-old neighbor. He'd lived in the next house for 20 years. We shared coffee on Sundays and argued about football and politics. He was a meticulous, observant man, a retired police detective. I dragged myself toward the window with the little strength I had left. "Thomas! Yes, I'm in here. I'm locked in," I shouted, my voice barely an audible rasp. "My God, Andrew, I haven't seen you water your plants in 3 days. This morning I saw your son and his wife leave very early, and it seemed strange. Something wasn't right. Are you hurt?" he asked, pressing his face to the glass. "Mark locked me in here on Wednesday. I have no water or food." "Please, call the police!" I begged, feeling real tears roll down my cheeks. This wasn't acting. It was genuine relief. "I'm going right now." "Hold on, my friend. Help is on the way," Thomas promised before disappearing from view. I heard his footsteps moving away quickly despite his age. Thomas was a man of action, trained for emergencies. I knew he would keep his word without delay. I collapsed on the floor by the window, breathing hard. The plan was working even better than expected. Not only would David activate the protocol after the missed calls, but now there was a direct witness who had heard my pleas. A retired police detective whose testimony would have absolute legal weight. 20 minutes later, I heard approaching sirens. First one, then two, finally 3 patrol cars converging in front of my house. Authoritative voices shouting commands, loud banging on the front door. "Chicago PD! Open up, immediately!" Silence from inside the house. Mark and Brenda weren't there. They had left early, never imagining their absence would facilitate the rescue. "We have authorization to enter." "Step away from the door!" A loud crack, probably a police battering ram, shattered the lock. Multiple footsteps flooded the floor above. I heard furniture moving, doors opening, voices coordinating. "In here! The basement door is bolted from the outside!" someone shouted. The bolt slid back with a metal shriek. The door flew open. Bright light flooded the stairs. 3 uniformed officers descended quickly. "Mr. Vidal, can you hear me?" asked a young female officer, kneeling beside me. "Yes. 3 days. No water. My son," I murmured, letting my weakness show. "It's okay, sir. You're safe now. We're getting you out of here," said another officer, speaking into his radio. "We need paramedics. Male victim, elderly. Signs of severe dehydration." They helped me up the stairs carefully. Each step was a monumental effort. When I finally got out of the basement and saw the daylight filling my living room, I felt overwhelmingly dizzy. 2 paramedics were already waiting with a stretcher. Low blood pressure, weak pulse, dehydration confirmed, one diagnosed, while placing an IV in my arm. Thomas appeared next to the stretcher, his face etched with worry. "Andrew, it's all going to be okay now." I told them everything. "They're looking for Mark," he said, squeezing my hand briefly. They loaded me into the ambulance. As the back doors closed, I saw more officers cordoning off my house as a crime scene. Curious neighbors were gathering on the sidewalk. Among them, I recognized Mrs. Gutierrez from across the street, holding up her phone, recording everything. Social media would be buzzing in minutes. During the ride to City General Hospital, I kept my eyes closed, but my mind was working at full speed. Everything was happening as planned, even better. Thomas's testimony added unquestionable credibility. The physical evidence of my condition confirmed abuse. Mark and Brenda's early flight suggested a guilty conscience. In the ER, doctors and nurses surrounded me immediately. Blood tests, EKG, aggressive IV hydration. A doctor with graying hair checked my vital signs with a grave expression. "Mr. Vidal, you've suffered severe dehydration." Another day, and we would be talking about permanent kidney damage. "Who did this to you?" she asked with professional outrage. "My son," I replied simply, letting those 2 words carry all their emotional weight. The doctor exchanged significant looks with the nurses. In their profession, they had seen many forms of family violence, but abuse of elderly parents by their children generated a particular disgust. 2 hours later, stabilized and resting in a private room, I was visited by a police detective, a burly man in his 52nds with a digital recorder in his hand. "Mr. Vidal, I'm Detective Navarro. I need your full statement on what happened," he said, sitting by the bed. I told him everything, in great detail. The demand for money, the threats, the confinement, the 3 days without provisions. I spoke slowly, leaving strategic pauses for the weight of each fact to settle. Does your son have a history of violent behavior? The detective asked, taking notes. Not physical violence, but he changed drastically in recent months. I have documentation of gambling addiction problems that my lawyer compiled. I answered, bringing up the information I had prepared. The detective's eyes lit up. You had prior documentation? You anticipated something like this might happen? I'm a construction man, detective. I spent 40 years anticipating structural problems before buildings collapsed. I learned to read the early cracks, I explained, with a metaphor that seemed to resonate with him. I'll need that documentation. We'll also be issuing arrest warrants for Mark Vidal and Brenda Peterson for kidnapping, coercion, and elder abuse. These are serious felonies with significant prison time, he informed me, closing his notebook. I nodded slowly. The final pieces of the plan were falling into place. Mark would face legal consequences, real and unavoidable. There would be no fatherly bailout this time. No second chance gifted, just hard justice and painful lessons he should have learned years ago. The detective got up to leave but paused at the door. Mr. Vidal, I'm sorry for what your son did to you. No father should have to suffer a betrayal like that, he said with genuine empathy before leaving. I was left alone in the room, listening to the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The hardest part was over. Now, the real lesson would begin. I spent 2 full days in the hospital under observation. The tests revealed severe dehydration, the beginning of a urinary tract infection from the contaminated water, and contusions on my back from sleeping on the cold concrete. Nothing permanent, but serious enough to document provable physical abuse. On the afternoon of August 20th, as I was resting and reading the newspaper, my room door burst open. Sarah ran in, her eyes swollen from crying. Behind her, a social worker was trying to keep pace. "Grandpa!" my granddaughter cried, throwing herself into my arms, careful not to hit the IV lines. "I didn't know anything, I swear. Mom told me you were on a trip visiting your cousins in Valencia." I hugged her with all the strength I had left. Sarah was shaking against my chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Her pain was genuine, innocent. This 6-year-old girl had just discovered her parents were capable of monstrosities. "It's okay, my girl. I know you had nothing to do with it," I whispered, stroking her brown hair, which she inherited from her grandmother Mary. "I saw the news this morning. Everyone in Chicago is talking about it. At school, people were looking at me like I was guilty too. How could they do this to you? How?" she asked, pulling back to look me in the eyes. "Your parents are sick, Sarah. Addiction transformed them into people I don't recognize anymore," I explained, choosing my words carefully. I didn't want to completely destroy the image she had of them, but I couldn't lie to her either. The social worker, a woman in her 40s with a folder full of documents, approached discreetly. "Mr. Vidal, I'm Christine Collins from Child Protective Services. Given that Sarah's parents are wanted by the police, we need to establish temporary guardianship. Would you be willing to take in your granddaughter while this situation is resolved?" "Of course. Sarah will always have a home with me," I answered immediately, squeezing my granddaughter's hand. Christine nodded, taking notes. "Perfect. I'll process the paperwork today. Sarah can stay with you once you're discharged from the hospital." My granddaughter hugged me again, this time with relief mixed with sadness. She had lost her parents under terrible circumstances, but at least she wouldn't also lose her stability and her home. That night, around 9 p.m., I received a call on the hospital phone. The nurse handed me the receiver with a serious expression. "Mr. Vidal, this is Detective Navarro." "I have news," said the familiar voice. "I'm listening, Detective," I replied, sitting up in bed. "We arrested Mark Vidal and Brenda Peterson this afternoon at a hotel near the state line. They were trying to buy bus tickets to Canada when officers intercepted them. They are both in police custody and will be transferred back to Chicago tomorrow to appear before a judge." I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and pain. My son had tried to flee the country. That demonstrated full awareness of his crimes and a total absence of remorse or any intention to face the consequences. "Did they say anything during the arrest?" I asked. Brenda blamed Mark for everything, claiming she only followed his orders out of fear. "Mark remained silent until we mentioned your name. Then he asked how you were," the detective relayed in a neutral tone. That last piece of information hit me unexpectedly. Despite everything, a small part of my son still cared. Maybe not all was lost. Maybe, in some corner of his addicted being, there was something left of the decent man I raised. Thank you for informing me, Detective. When will you need my formal testimony? The judge has scheduled a preliminary hearing for the day after tomorrow, August 22nd. You will need to be present if your health allows. I'll be there, I promised before hanging up. The next day, August 21st, I was discharged from the hospital with a list of medications and orders to rest. Sarah was waiting for me at the entrance with Thomas, who had offered to drive us in his car. The ride home was silent. Sarah stared out the window without a word. Thomas drove, focused, respecting our shared grief. When we arrived, I saw my garden looking neglected after 5 days. The hydrangeas were beginning to wilt from lack of water. I'll take care of the garden this week, Grandpa. You rest, Sarah offered, with a weak but genuine smile. We went inside. Everything was exactly as I had left it that Wednesday, August 16th, except for the yellow police tape still marking the basement area as a crime scene. Sarah shuddered when she saw it. You never have to go down there, sweetheart. In fact, I'm going to seal that door permanently, I assured her, placing my hand on her shoulder. That afternoon, while Sarah was organizing her things in the guest room that would now be her bedroom, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find David Miller standing there with his inseparable leather briefcase. Andrew, I tried calling you for 3 days. When you didn't answer the second day, I activated the protocol as we agreed, but Thomas had already alerted the police. It all worked out perfectly, though I wish you hadn't had to suffer like that, he said, entering and giving me a brief hug. It was necessary, David. Mark needed to get to this point. Any intervention before this would have been seen as me exaggerating, I explained, leading him to my study. David opened his briefcase and took out multiple, meticulously organized folders. Here is all the documentation I gathered over 6 months. Bank statements showing the bets, photographs of Mark entering loan shark offices, recordings of conversations where he admits his debts. I also included the history of loans you gave him that he never paid back. Everything is certified and ready to present in court. I reviewed the documents slowly. David had done flawless work. Every transaction was documented, every suspicious movement photographed, every relevant conversation legally recorded with my prior consent in my own home. This is more than enough to ensure significant convictions, I commented. Yes, but there's more, David added, pulling out another folder. I investigated Brenda, too. It turns out she has a record. 2 prior complaints for fraud in Boston before she moved to Chicago. They never went to trial because the victims withdrew the charges, probably under pressure. This woman is a professional manipulator. That information changed my perspective. Brenda wasn't just a wife following her addicted husband. She was an experienced predator who likely saw Mark as a perfect opportunity, a vulnerable man with a rich father. So she deliberately dragged him into this, I murmured, feeling a new layer of anger. Very likely. Phone records show Brenda contacted Rodriguez 3 months before Mark asked you for the first big loan. She set the stage, David confirmed. Sarah appeared at the study door with 2 cups of tea. She had overheard us, and her face showed a mixture of horror and understanding. My mother was always cold to me, Grandpa. I never felt like she really loved me. Only Dad showed affection, she said, handing us the cups with trembling hands. I hugged her again. This girl had lost not only her parents, but also the illusion of ever having had a functional family. Sarah, listen to me, I said, holding her by the shoulders. Your father made terrible mistakes, but he did it because he's sick. Your mother is different. She acted with premeditation. But neither of them defines who you are. You are my granddaughter. You carry your grandmother Mary's blood, and you have a bright future ahead of you. She nodded, wiping away her tears. Is Dad going to prison for a long time? Yes. Probably several years, I answered honestly. And will you ever forgive him? That question left me speechless for several seconds. Finally, I answered with the only truth I knew. I don't know, Sarah, but I know that what I'm doing now is for his own good, even if he doesn't understand it yet. The morning of August 22nd dawned gray and rainy. I woke up early, unable to sleep, knowing that in a few hours I would see Mark for the first time since the rescue. Sarah made breakfast in silence, toast with olive oil and strong coffee. We both ate mechanically, with no real appetite. Do you want me to go with you to the courthouse, Grandpa? She asked, nervously wiping crumbs from the table. No, sweetheart. This is something I have to face alone. Besides, I'd rather you not see your parents in that state, I replied, stroking her cheek. Thomas arrived promptly at 8:30 a.m. During the drive to the downtown courthouse, he tried to make light conversation about the weather and local news, but we both knew he was just trying to calm my nerves. I thanked him for the gesture with a tired smile. The courthouse was buzzing with morning activity. Lawyers in dark suits conversed in hushed tones. Families waited anxiously in the marble hallways. Clerks rushed between offices carrying stacks of files. David was waiting for me at the entrance to courtroom 3, his expression professional but his eyes understanding. Everything is ready, Andrew. The judge reviewed the preliminary documentation last night and was appalled. He said in 30 years on the bench, he's rarely seen a case of parental abuse so thoroughly documented, he informed me as we walked into the room. We entered and took our seats in the front row. The room smelled of old wood and old paper. 3 rows of empty benches separated us from the judge's bench. To our right, separated by a central aisle, were the seats for the defendants and their lawyers. At 9 a.m. on the dot, a side door opened. 2 bailiffs entered, flanking Mark and Brenda, both in handcuffs. My breath caught when I saw them. Mark looked gaunt, with a 4-day beard and deep, dark circles. He was wearing the same wrinkled clothes from the day of his arrest. When his eyes met mine, I saw something I didn't expect. Deep, genuine shame. He looked away immediately, unable to hold my gaze. Brenda, on the other hand, watched me with cold calculation. Her face showed smudged makeup, but no visible emotion. It was like looking at a statue of ice in human form. All rise. The court is now in session, the bailiff announced. Judge Ramirez entered in his black robe and sat down. A man in his 60s, his face severe, weathered by decades of seeing the worst of humanity. He opened the file and began to read aloud. Case number 2023-0837. Mark Vidal and Brenda Peterson, accused of kidnapping, coercion, elder abuse, and attempted extortion against Andrew Vidal. Do the defendants understand the charges? The defense attorney, a young man clearly overwhelmed by the case's gravity, nodded weakly. Yes, Your Honor. My clients understand the charges. Very well, Mr. Vidal, please proceed with your testimony, the judge ordered, turning to me. I stood up, feeling every eye in the room on me. I walked to the stand and placed my hand on the Bible to swear to tell the truth. My voice trembled slightly as I began, but it grew stronger with every word. I recounted everything, chronologically. The visit on August 16th, the demand for $2 million, the threats, being pushed into the basement, the 4-day confinement without food or water. I described the cold concrete, the unbearable thirst, the contaminated water I drank to survive, the genuine fear that I would die down there, alone and forgotten. At any point, did your son show remorse or try to check on your well-being? He offered to let me out, if I signed the papers. But when I begged for water, his wife ordered him not to give me anything until I signed. He obeyed. I replied, feeling my voice break as I remembered that specific moment. Mark buried his head in his hands. His shoulders began to shake silently. He was crying, but I couldn't allow myself to soften. Not yet. This was necessary. Mr. Vidal, I understand you had documented worrying behaviors from your son for months prior to this incident. Is that correct? The judge continued. Yes, Your Honor. I hired my lawyer in March 2023 to investigate discreetly because I suspected Mark had developed a gambling addiction. The findings confirmed my fears, I explained, as David stood to hand the folders of evidence to the court. The judge spent 15 minutes reviewing the documents in silence. His expression darkened with every page. Bank statements showing $120,000 in online bets in 6 months. Photographs of Mark entering the offices of known loan sharks. Recordings of conversations where he admitted to owing $300,000. This documentation is extraordinary. It shows forethought on your part, Mr. Vidal. But it also proves you tried to protect your son before he reached this extreme, the judge commented. I was hoping he would come to me asking for real help, not more money to feed his destruction. When he locked me up, I understood he had hit bottom. Only by facing severe consequences could he begin a real recovery, I explained, my voice firm. Brenda let out a sarcastic laugh that echoed in the room. The judge shot her a glare. "Does the defendant find something amusing about this situation?" he asked in an icy tone. "I find it amusing that this manipulative old man presents himself as an innocent victim when he clearly orchestrated this whole thing. He hired private investigators. He documented everything. He probably left clues to be rescued exactly when it suited him. This is a perfectly planned legal theater," she spat, with venom. The silence that followed was absolute. Even her own lawyer turned pale at his client's stupidity. David looked at me wide-eyed, clearly worried by that accusation. But the judge almost smiled. It was a cold smile, from someone who had just watched a defendant dig their own grave. "Miss Peterson, let me understand your logic. Are you suggesting that Mr. Vidal voluntarily locked himself in his own basement without food or water for 4 days, risking permanent kidney damage and possibly his life, just to legally frame you?" he asked, his irony thick. Brenda realized her mistake too late. "No, he knew. What he knew was that his son was in serious trouble and needed intervention. What you did was kidnap and torture an elderly man for money." The difference is clear. The judge cut her off, his authority final. Then Mark spoke for the first time. His voice was barely a broken whisper. "Your Honor, my father is right about everything. I am a gambling addict. I've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I owe money to dangerous people, and when he refused me more money, I lost my mind." Brenda suggested locking him up, but I agreed to it. I pushed my own father into the basement. I locked the door. I condemned him to suffer. There is no possible justification. Tears streamed freely down his face as he spoke. Brenda stared at him with absolute fury, understanding that he had just destroyed any possible defense. The defense lawyer stood up, desperate. "Your Honor, my client is clearly not in a mental state to testify at this moment. I request a recess." "Denied. Your client is perfectly lucid and has just made a full voluntary confession," the judge replied, closing the file with a sharp sound. Then he looked directly at me. "Mr. Vidal, you have shown an extraordinary combination of wisdom and paternal pain. Few fathers would have had the strength to document a son's fall and allow him to face the full consequences. I ask that you wait outside while I deliberate on pre-trial measures." I stood up and walked toward the exit. As I passed Mark, he reached out his cuffed hand, trying to touch me. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," he sobbed. I stopped. I looked at him for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't even planned. I took a folded letter from my pocket and placed it in his cuffed hand. "Read this when you're alone." It was all I said before walking out of the courtroom. I waited in the hallway for 40 minutes, which felt like eternal hours. David stood by my side, reviewing additional documents, preparing for any scenario. Thomas had gone down to the cafeteria but returned with 3 coffees that none of us touched. Finally, the bailiff opened the door and motioned for us to return. The courtroom had filled with journalists who had somehow gotten wind of the case. Cameras and recorders filled the back rows. The case of the father locked up by his own son had become national news. Judge Ramirez entered, and we all stood. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone after years of hiding emotions to maintain judicial impartiality. "I have thoroughly reviewed the evidence presented, the testimonies, and the confession of the defendant, Mark Vidal. This court determines there is more than sufficient evidence to proceed with a formal trial. As for pre-trial measures," he paused deliberately, staring hard at Mark and Brenda. "Given the extreme severity of the facts, the clear flight risk demonstrated by their attempt to flee to Canada, and the premeditated nature of the crime, both defendants will remain in custody without possibility of bail until the trial." Brenda jumped to her feet, screaming, "This is unfair! We have a minor child! Who will take care of Sarah?" The judge looked at her with barely concealed contempt. "Miss Peterson, you should have thought of your daughter before you participated in the kidnapping and torture of your father-in-law. Sarah is already under the temporary guardianship of her grandfather, where she will receive the care you clearly cannot provide. Bailiffs, remove the defendants." Mark didn't protest. He walked between the guards with his head down, still clutching the letter I had given him. Brenda hurled verbal venom until the door closed behind her, cutting off her screams. The journalists surrounded us immediately as we left. Microphones and cameras were thrust from every direction as they fired questions. "Mr. Vidal, How does it feel to see your son go to prison? Did you expect them to go this far? Have you considered forgiving Mark? David tried to clear a path through the crowd, but I raised my hand, stopping him. I needed to say something, not for the journalists, but for all the parents who might one day face similar situations. I love my son. I will always love him. But true love doesn't mean protecting someone from the consequences of their actions. It means having the courage to let them fall when it's the only way they can learn to get up on their own, I said, looking directly at the cameras. Mark is sick. He's an addict, and he needs professional help. But first, he must accept full responsibility for what he did. Only then can he heal. So you won't forgive him? A young reporter insisted. Forgiveness is a process, not an event. One day, perhaps. But first, my son must demonstrate real change. Not empty words or desperate promises, I replied, before letting David escort me to the exit. In the car on the way back, Thomas broke the silence. You did the right thing, Andrew. I know it hurts, but it was necessary. I nodded, unable to speak. The pain was physical, a constant tightness in my chest that no medicine could relieve. I had sent my only son to prison. Even though I knew intellectually that it was just and necessary, emotionally, I was devastated. Sarah was waiting at the door when we arrived. Her face was searching for answers she didn't want to hear. Pre-trial custody. No bail, I said simply. She nodded slowly, processing the information. How long? Until the trial? Probably several months. And after that, if they're found guilty. Years more, I explained, with the brutal honesty she deserved. To my surprise, Sarah didn't collapse. She straightened up, dried her tears, and spoke with a maturity that belied her 16 years. Then we have to prepare to live without them. I want to finish high school, go to college, build my own life. I'm not going to let their mistakes define my future. I hugged her, pride and sadness mixed together. This child had matured years in just days, forced by circumstances no teenager should ever have to face. That night, while Sarah slept, I sat in my study and reviewed the 4 letters I had written during my confinement in the basement. The one I gave Mark was the first one, dated August 16th, 8 p.m. I had written it with a shaky hand but a clear mind. Son, as I write this, you are upstairs, probably justifying what you've done. Maybe you believe I'm your enemy, that I'm denying you what is yours. But let me tell you something I never told you. I continued reading my own handwriting. When you were 5 years old, you came down with pneumonia. The doctors said your chances were poor. Your mother and I spent 72 straight hours at the hospital taking turns by your bedside. At the most critical moment, when your fever hit 104, I prayed to a God I barely believed in. I promised anything in exchange for your life. When you finally woke up and gave me a weak smile, I knew I would do anything to protect you, always. And I did, Mark. I protected you. I rescued you. I saved you time and time again. But every rescue made you weaker, more dependent. You never learned that actions have consequences, because Dad was always there to absorb the blow. The words continued for 2 full pages. I reminded him of specific moments from his childhood, lessons I tried to teach, values I tried to instill, but I also admitted my own mistakes as a father. Working too much, showing love through money instead of time, constantly rescuing him, creating a pattern of irresponsibility. The letter ended with a promise and a warning. What I am doing now, allowing you to face the full consequences of your actions, is the greatest act of love I can give you. Because I am finally treating you like the adult man you are, not the child you continue to behave as. You can hate me for this. You probably will for a long time. But one day, if you manage to recover, you will understand that this was the moment your father loved you enough to let you fall, knowing it was the only way you could learn to fly. I love you, son. I will always love you, but I will not rescue you anymore. Dad. I refolded the letter carefully and placed it with the other 3. One day, I would give him all of them. But for now, Mark needed to process just the first one. My phone buzzed with a message from David. Formal trial is set for February 2024. 6 months to prepare. Brenda has hired an expensive private lawyer. She will try to blame everything on Mark. We need a strategy. I replied briefly. We'll discuss tomorrow. Tonight, I need to rest. I poured myself a whiskey, something I rarely did, and went out to the garden. The stars shone over Chicago, indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. I sat on the bench where Mary and I used to have coffee on Sunday mornings. I did it, my love. It was just as hard as you said it would be, I whispered to the sky. But now comes the hardest part. Waiting. Waiting for him to understand. Waiting for him to heal. Waiting, without knowing if I will ever get my son back. The night wind rustled the leaves of the cherry tree we planted when Mark was born, 42 years old. That tree had grown strong and healthy. My son could too, but first he needed to touch solid ground after years of floating in denial and addiction. I drank my whiskey slowly, letting the liquid burn my still sore throat. Tomorrow, the long legal process would begin. There would be more hearings, more testimony, more public pain. But tonight, I just needed to be at peace with my decision. I had done the right thing. I knew it in my mind. One day, I hoped, I would know it in my heart too. It took 3 weeks before I gathered the courage to visit him. 3 weeks during which Sarah and I established a new routine. Quiet breakfasts, afternoons of studying for her, walks in the park on weekends. We were trying to build normalcy on top of emotional ruins. On August 28th, a Tuesday, I drove to the state prison, located just outside the city. The gray building rose imposingly against the blue sky, surrounded by high walls and barbed wire. The contrast with the freedom of the surrounding countryside was almost obscene. I went through 3 security checkpoints. I left my wallet, keys, belt. A guard checked the yellow envelope I brought with me, making sure it didn't contain any contraband. Just letters, I explained. Letters from a father to his son. I was led to a visiting room divided by thick glass panels. Rows of metal chairs on each side, old-fashioned telephones hanging on the walls to communicate. Other visitors already occupied some ofs, weeping wives, consoling mothers, confused children. I sat in booth 7 and waited. 5 minutes later, a door opened on the other side of the glass. Mark entered, escorted by a guard. He was wearing an orange prison uniform, his hair shaved almost to the scalp, his face thinner than the last time I saw him. He walked slowly and sat down across from me. We looked at each other for several seconds without moving. His brown eyes, identical to his mother's, were red but dry. He was past the crying stage. Now, all that was left was a grim acceptance of his reality. He picked up the phone. I did the same. "Hi, Dad," he said, his voice hoarse. "Hello, son," I replied, feeling my throat tighten. "I read your letter. I've read it 100 times. Every word," he began without preamble. "You were right. About everything. I always depended on you to solve my problems. I never learned how to fall because you always caught me before I hit the ground." I nodded slowly. "It was my mistake, as much as yours. I failed you by teaching you that money solved everything. No, Dad. You worked 40 years to give me opportunities I never appreciated. I wasted them. Gambling, lying, destroying everything I touched," he said, gently tapping the glass with his fist. "Brenda manipulated me, yes. But I chose to follow her. I chose to gamble. I chose to lock you in that basement. Those decisions were mine. His ability to take responsibility surprised me. 3 weeks in prison had achieved what years of conversations never could. True introspection. How is it in here?" I asked, changing the subject. "Hard. Very hard. I share a cell with 3 other men. One is in for robbery, another for drug trafficking, the third for assault. They look at me weird when I tell them why I'm here. Even criminals have codes, and abusing your own father violates all of them," he explained with bitterness. "Have they hurt you?" "Some taunting, shoves. Nothing serious yet. But I know it's coming. My reputation in here is garbage," he admitted. "I deserve it." I felt a sudden anger at myself. My plan had been necessary, but the consequences were brutal. Mark was going to face violence, humiliation, years of suffering. A part of me wanted to rescue him again, to pull out money for better lawyers, to look for appeals. But the wiser part knew that would only repeat the cycle. "There's a rehab program for addicts inside the prison." "Did you sign up?" I asked. "Yes. I start next week. Group therapy 3 times a week, individual sessions. The whole structure," he replied, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I want to change, Dad, for real. Not to get out early, or to look good for you. For myself. Because I finally understand, if I don't change, I'll die being this. A failed addict who betrayed his own family. I took out the yellow envelope and held it up to the glass. I wrote 4 letters during those days in the basement. I gave you the first one at the courthouse. Here are the other 3. The guard will review them and give them to you, I explained, placing the envelope in the transfer tray. Can I know what they're about? He asked, curiosity mixed with fear. The second one talks about your grandparents, my parents, who grew up in extreme poverty after the war. The third one is about how I met your mother and how we built our life together. The fourth, I paused, feeling the emotion rise. The fourth describes my vision of who you could become if you manage to beat your addiction. The man I know exists under all these layers of self-destruction. Mark closed his eyes, gripping the phone tightly. A single tear rolled down his cheek. I don't deserve your faith in me. Maybe not, but you have it anyway, because you're my son, and because I still see flashes of the good boy we raised, I said, wiping away my own tears. We talked for 40 more minutes. I told him about Sarah, how she was adjusting, her plans to study psychology in college to help broken families like ours. I told him about Thomas, who visited me daily to make sure I was okay. I told him about David meticulously preparing the case. I didn't mention Brenda. Mark didn't ask either. That topic was dangerous territory we both instinctively avoided. When the guard announced that time was up, Mark leaned forward, pressing his palm against the glass. I placed my hand on my side, lining it up with his. The cold glass separated us physically, but the connection remained. I'm going to make you proud, Dad. I don't know how long it will take, but I will, he promised, his voice cracked but determined. I'm already proud of you for admitting the truth and accepting help. That's the hardest first step, I replied honestly. I stood up to leave. Mark remained seated, watching me walk to the door. Just before I left, I turned back one last time. He was still there, phone to his ear, even though I had already hung up mine, as if holding that posture would prolong our connection. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for 15 minutes before I could drive. The emotions were overwhelming. Hope mixed with pain, pride mixed with guilt, love mixed with disappointment, all of it forming an impossible knot in my chest. I drove back slowly, processing the visit. Mark had shown genuine change, but I knew enough about addiction to know the road would be long and full of setbacks. Not all addicts recover. The statistics are discouraging, more than 60% relapse in the first year after rehab. But for the first time in months, I felt real hope. My son had hit rock bottom. He had lost his freedom, his dignity, his immediate future, but he had gained something infinitely more valuable: clarity about who he was, and who he no longer wanted to be. When I got home, Sarah was making dinner. She had learned to cook using internet videos, determined to contribute to the household. "How is Dad?" she asked, without turning to look at me, focused on chopping vegetables. "He's starting to understand," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "The road is long, but there's hope." Sarah put down the knife and finally looked at me. Her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Do you think we can ever be a family again? Not like before, but something?" I walked over and hugged her. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I know we're going to try. And sometimes trying is enough." That night, before sleeping, I wrote a 5th letter. This one wasn't for Mark. It was for myself, documenting this day, these emotions, these fragile hopes. One day, when all this was history, I wanted to remember exactly what this moment of painful transformation felt like. Today, I watched my son begin his rebirth. It was born in the pain of a prison cell, but it is a real birth nonetheless. As a father, I've learned that sometimes loving means letting go, and letting go hurts more than anything. But the pain has purpose. Pain teaches, it transforms, it purifies, and when it's over, if we all survive, we will be different. Maybe better, certainly wiser. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. In the dark, I thought of Mary, and how proud she would be of how I handled this impossible crisis. Not perfectly, but with intention and with genuine love. Tomorrow, the routine would continue, but something fundamental had changed. Hope, however fragile, had returned. The following months passed with agonizing slowness. October brought cold rains that turned the Chicago streets into liquid mirrors. Sarah started her senior year of high school with fierce determination, maintaining excellent grades despite the family scandal. I slowly resumed my life, tending the garden, meeting Thomas for coffee, avoiding the curious stares of neighbors who whispered when I walked by. I visited Mark every 2 weeks. Each visit revealed gradual changes. His posture straightened. His eyes regained clarity. He spoke about his therapy sessions with a new vocabulary. Triggers, coping mechanisms, radical responsibility. The rehab program was working. It was transforming him, cell by cell, thought by thought. In November, I got a call from David with unexpected news. "Andrew, Brenda wants to make a deal. Her lawyer contacted me, offering a full testimony against Mark in exchange for a reduced sentence," he reported, his neutral tone hiding obvious disapproval. "She'd betray her own husband?" I asked, though I wasn't surprised. Brenda would always prioritize her own survival over any loyalty. "Exactly. She claims Mark planned everything, that she only went along out of fear. She has text messages that supposedly prove she tried to talk him out of it," David explained. "Convenient messages she probably wrote as an insurance policy after the fact. What do you recommend?" "We reject it, flatly. We have solid evidence against both of them. We don't need her manipulated testimony. Besides, accepting it would mean validating her victim narrative when we know she was an active accomplice," he replied with professional conviction. "Then we reject it," I confirmed, feeling a sense of satisfaction imagining Brenda's face when she got the news. December brought the first direct encounter between Mark and Brenda since their arrest. A mandatory settlement hearing where the judge would try to reach agreements before the formal trial. I attended as the primary victim, sitting in the front row with David. Mark entered first, even thinner, but with a new dignity in his bearing. Brenda arrived 5 minutes later, perfectly made up, wearing an elegant suit someone had provided. She was clearly trying to project the image of a respectable woman, unjustly accused. When their eyes met, something extraordinary happened. Mark looked at her without anger or pain, just absolute indifference, as if looking at a stranger he once knew superficially. Brenda, on the other hand, glared at him with pure hatred. The judge opened the session. "We are here to explore settlement possibilities to avoid a lengthy trial. Miss Peterson, your lawyer indicates a willingness to cooperate with testimony against Mr. Vidal. Do you confirm this?" "Yes, Your Honor. My husband forced me to participate, under threats." "I have proof," she declared, her voice trembling in a carefully rehearsed performance. Mark let out a short, bitter laugh. His lawyer, young but competent, motioned for him to be silent. "Mr. Vidal, do you wish to respond to these accusations?" the judge asked. Mark stood up slowly. He looked directly at Brenda and spoke with devastating calm. "Brenda, it was you who suggested locking up my father when I was hesitating. You who said we should let him suffer until he signed. You who contacted Rodriguez, introducing our family to a world of loan sharks and violence. I've spent 4 months in therapy accepting my guilt, but I won't accept yours, too. I did unforgivable things, but I wasn't the only one. The silence in the room was absolute. Brenda turned visibly pale, her victim mask cracking. "You're lying! It was all your idea from the beginning!" she shrieked, losing her composure. "Miss Peterson, control yourself!" the judge ordered severely. Then he turned to me. "Mr. Vidal, as the primary victim, would you accept any plea deal for a reduced sentence for either defendant?" I stood up, feeling all eyes on me. This was the moment David and I had prepared for weeks. "Your Honor, I have reflected deeply on justice versus revenge. I am not seeking revenge. I am seeking for my aggressors to fully understand the consequences of their actions and to receive real help for their problems." I began, choosing each word carefully. "For Brenda Peterson, I accept no reduction whatsoever. She has shown zero remorse, zero acceptance of responsibility, and zero intention to change. She deserves to face the full sentence the law dictates." Brenda stared at me with a hatred so intense I could feel its heat from 15 feet away. "For my son, Mark." I paused, the emotion rising. "I have seen genuine change. 4 months of therapy, a full admission of guilt, real work on his addiction. Therefore, I request that his sentence include a mandatory continuation of psychological treatment for his entire sentence and subsequent probation. but I do not ask for a reduction in years. Justice must be served. Mark looked at me, tears streaming freely. He nodded slowly, understanding that this was tough love, manifested in its purest form. The judge took extensive notes. I understand your position, Mr. Vidal. It is unusual to see a victim distinguish between aggressors with such moral clarity. Your requests will be taken under consideration at sentencing. There is one more thing, Your Honor, I continued, pulling an envelope from my jacket. I have prepared a document establishing a trust fund for $500,000 in Mark's name. It will be locked and inaccessible until he completes his full sentence, demonstrates 2 consecutive years of sobriety verified by medical professionals, and holds a stable job for a minimum of 18 months. The entire room reacted. Murmurs of surprise filled the space. Brenda looked like she was about to faint from rage. Mark was covering his face with both hands, sobbing silently. It is a second chance. Conditioned on real, sustained change, it is not a bailout. It is an investment in the man my son can become. If he chooses the right path, I explained, handing the document to the court clerk. Mr. Vidal, in 32 years presiding over this courtroom, I have never seen a victim demonstrate such a combination of firmness and compassion, the judge commented, clear respect in his tone. Your approach will be a model for this case. The hearing continued for 2 more hours, discussing procedural details. Brenda tried several desperate tactics. Fake tears, additional accusations, dramatic pleas. Nothing worked. Her victim strategy had completely collapsed. At the end, as we were leaving, Mark caught up to me in the hallway, escorted by guards. "Dad, wait," he called. I stopped and turned. We were separated by 10 feet and 2 guards, but the emotional distance had shrunk immensely. $500,000. It's too much. I don't deserve it, he said with genuine humility. This isn't about deserving. It's about potential. The money you were so desperate for was never really accessible, Mark. David and I protected everything legally a year ago, but this trust, this represents something different. My faith in your capacity for real transformation, I explained, moving a little closer. What if I fail? What if I relapse after I get out? He asked, visible fear in his eyes. Then the money will remain locked, and you will learn another hard lesson. But I don't think you will fail. I've seen your work in therapy, your acceptance of responsibility, your gradual change. I'm betting on you, son, but this time with clear, unmovable conditions. The guards indicated his time was up. Mark nodded, unable to speak from the emotion. I watched him walk away down the hall, walking taller than when he arrived. David clapped me on the shoulder. Masterful move, Andrew. You gave him concrete hope tied to verifiable requirements. It's exactly the kind of structured motivation that recovering addicts need. I learned from the best, I replied with a tired smile. 40 years building structures taught me that solid foundations need deep footings and support beams. This is just emotional architecture. We left the courthouse in a light December rain. The journalists were waiting, but this time I walked past without a statement. I had already said everything that mattered, where it mattered. In front of the judge, in front of my son, in front of the truth. That night, Sarah and I ate dinner in a comfortable silence. She had followed the case through the news and understood the meaning of my decisions. "Grandpa, do you think Dad will really change?" she asked, washing the dishes. "I think he has a real chance, if he chooses to take it. But the final decision is his, not mine. I can only create the conditions for possible success," I answered honestly. "And the $500,000? Aren't you afraid he'll just waste it? If he wastes it, I will have lost money but gained certainty. I would rather give him the chance and risk the financial loss than never try and live wondering, what if, I explained. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You're the wisest man I know, Grandpa. Not wise, sweetheart. Just experienced in failures that taught hard lessons," I replied, hugging her. The formal trial arrived in February 2024, 6 months after that August afternoon when my life changed forever. The main courtroom was completely packed. Journalists filled every available seat. Psychologists interested in the case studied it for academic research, and curious citizens were drawn by the extraordinary nature of the crime. The trial lasted 4 intense days. Witnesses paraded one after another. Thomas recounting how he rescued me. Doctors from the hospital, describing my critical state of dehydration. Detective Navarro, presenting the collected evidence. David executed his legal strategy with surgical precision, each document placed at exactly the right moment for maximum impact. Brenda maintained her victim act for 2 full days. Her lawyer tried to present her as a submissive wife with no agency of her own. But when David presented her record from Boston, the prior fraud complaints, the contacts with loan sharks that she had initiated, her narrative collapsed spectacularly. Mark, in contrast, didn't try to defend himself. He answered every question with a brutal honesty that made even his own lawyer uncomfortable. He admitted to planning the confinement, executing it, deliberately keeping me without provisions. He described his addiction with the clinical language he'd learned in therapy. Compulsive patterns, cognitive distortion, systemic denial. Why did you finally decide to confess completely? The prosecutor asked during cross-examination. Because lying anymore would have continued the pattern of evasion that destroyed my life. My father taught me, in the most painful way possible, that only the absolute truth can build a foundation for real change, Mark replied, looking directly at me as he spoke. On the 4th day, it was time for the verdict and sentencing. The court deliberated for 3 hours, which felt like an eternity. Sarah squeezed my hand, her own hand nervous. David reviewed documents unnecessarily, a physical manifestation of his professional anxiety. Finally, Judge Ramirez entered, his expression solemn. We all rose in respectful silence. After reviewing